It is current year plus 8. Thousands around the world have lost their faith in existing and persisting order. The desire for stability has expired in all but spirit, but will remain in these conquered lands. Chaos is all which remains, with a choice of two forms. On the one hand, there is the chaos of encroaching anarcho-tyranny, while on the other, chaos of exodus, the as yet unknown. Millions of incorrigible plebeians clap their miserable naive hands at the spectacles and ceremonies of bread and circus, appeasing their basil and banal, their heavy laden hearts lined with leaden spirit, like an automaton made flesh execute their sequences in submission's abundance, for what is right, but not which is commanded by power, and what is wrong, but to reject such current things. Such are mere simulacra of men. But it is not merely to reject for rejection's sake, but for the sake of values and immaterial belief. This noble sacrifice happens and exposes oneself to suffering, regardless of the choice to remain or leave. To stay means you will fight this ghastly circumstance for as long as you are able, with which you will bequeath your heirs. They, ideally, will continue your pain struggle. With each subsequent generation, your progeny will flip a coin, and we hope our legacy endures. Oblivion, the return to Edenic, bestial, unconscious, looms large over these men of courage, ready for the return to paradise in all likelihood. This chaos path is the death of man as a creature of God. His light, extinguished, will never again illuminate this earth. The alternative sacrifice is exodus. One might extricate oneself from this permanent purgatory of imploding empire and search out alternative locales to colonize. If this seems ridiculous, it isn't. You are already there if you are aware of the state of Western civilization. You already are considering it, even if you have chosen to stand and fight. I agree that this is a noble endeavor, and I have nothing but admiration for the efforts, but it is overwhelming in its prosecution. You are the enemy of order and power, and they make no reservation in how they will treat you. If you fight it, you will be devoured. If you resist it, you will be raped. If you submit to it, it will infect you, and if not you, then your progeny will someday fall to its talons. To assure yourself in the world of pause, there can be no half measures. It must be a complete and total victory. It must be a complete and total victory. This enemy and you cannot coexist. One will inevitably destroy the other, and time is not on your side. This isn't meant to insult our abilities nor dissuade our allies from the fight, for even in a losing battle there exists great honor. But we mustn't deceive ourselves. The situation is dire. It's not that the enemy is at the gates of our fortress readying its attack. We are inside its fortress, protected more by its laxity and neglect than by our talents and skills. With cunning and sharpness we may avoid its ire for some time, but not forever. It will test us and the mob on occasion to seek and destroy us, or our progeny. Sometimes it will accidentally eliminate some masses in seeking us out, but we too will on occasion be caught and destroyed. Hiding in plain sight becomes our camouflage, our mode de vie. Such continues until the proverbial crown is seized, which may be never. Generations will come and go, hanging on to threads of hope, the once freshly loomed tapestry becoming ever more threadbare, until it can no longer be held in the mind. Thus, hiding in plain sight, it becomes indistinguishable from the mob, and if it does not flourish elsewhere, your philosophical insights will be gone. I thus argue that an exodus of sorts is paramount to the continuation and flourishing of the philosophy of truth and justice. There are a number of ideas as to how or where this should be carried out. Resources and talents of all kinds will be required, and we possess them. But raw talent is not alone proficient. There needs to be something spiritually uniting the community. I do not know what this needs to be, though I can imagine a clergy of sorts, which would administer this, and if possible, also administer the education of our youth. Furthermore, it would counsel our people in life and hold the community together with strengthened purpose. It would likely be difficult at first for those of us inexperienced, but it will assist and strengthen the youth, and thus the future of our community, and the continuation of our pursuits. Whether or not one might believe it, it must be exercised in faith blindly as had been traditionally done. As for which form it takes, it needs to be decided, and that is all. Outside of that, all who choose an alternative should form a separate community which can maintain mutually cordial relations. The argument in regards to this division of friends is that it could weaken us. But a deeper analysis reveals that it would increase system stability to separate fundamental beliefs rather than force association. Over time, this would devolve into partisan politics, with each side trying to gain advantage over the whole, over the other. A wholly unproductive exercise by creating fundamental monocultures. Association with different tribes becomes voluntary. Association with different tribes becomes voluntary. The hope is each community is able to function maximally, and this would result in a higher degree of ideas independence, avoiding the encroachment of state intervention between incommunicable groups. We must ask where this could take place and consider what is needed. Ideally, the location will be largely free from interstate conflict, so we are neither drawn into a war nor subjected to its horrors. In either case, this should be minimized. Next, it would have to be an area with basic resources like water and land for food production. We should also have a reason to be welcomed into this host nation, which biases toward unoccupied boundary areas. Preferably, the weather should also be taken into account. Also, it is tactically beneficial to have some higher-order infrastructures within a few hours' drive for issues we cannot handle at first, such as surgical hospitals. Much must be considered. We can begin by ruling out totally out of the question locations. For example, most Western European nations, Canada, USA, and most of Southeast Asia. The cheaper, the better as well. The top candidates seem to be Eastern Siberia, Polynesia, or South America, along the Brazilian, Argentinian, or Uruguayan border, near or along the Uruguay River, around but not limited to the small town of Barra do Quarai. Eastern Siberia would have plenty of affordable land, essentially unlimited raw resources, and is quite isolated. However, it is also potentially weak to Chinese influence and exists as the logical Chinese Lebensraum. There is also the issue of the conflict between the West and Russia, which might leave our people subject to poor treatment by the host nation. Also, we could be treated as open traders by our former nations, making revisitable questionable. If general conscription occurs, we may be forced to fight in conflicts we have no interest in. The locals are usually very friendly, though there are likely some post-Soviet horrors one would have no choice but to witness. Polynesia would have fewer resources, but the climate is far superior. Locals could make for cheap labor, and they are very friendly to temporary residents, but not necessarily to permanent newcomers, as they are quite territorial. There are, however, a great diversity of locations to choose from. Most islands are small and rarely come up on the international political scene. Obviously, there is easy and near universal access to the sea. Fish are caught easily, and farming fish is a possibility. Depending on the particular island, there are many international shipping routes moving through Polynesia. Many of these islands have dwindling populations as residents seek Western opportunities. Pitcairn Island will be mostly abandoned in a few decades. The South American option, like the Polynesian, will have a great climate and few, if any, conflicts with the West. There are plentiful resources in comparison and highly developed metropoli within a few hours' drive from nearly anywhere, giving access to higher-level infrastructures that may be needed. The locals are highly welcoming of newcomers, often preferring them to other locals. There is a slowly decreasing birth rate, which would offer more opportunities for our own families. These three nations have a long history of hosting political dissidents, and pluralism is a well-established norm. The general population is made up largely of European lineages, especially in the southern Brazilian area. Many European traditions brought there long ago are practiced openly today exactly as they were 5 centuries before colonization. Although each of these areas represent a frontier zone with the potential for prosperity, I believe the South American option is the candidate which would be the most successful. The political apparatus there is entirely consumed by its own localized problems, and should we wish to be left alone, we will be. If at some point the state turns to interfere with us, corruption will be our friend, and we can grease the necessary gears and sprockets to pass through tight socio-political spaces, which would be unavailable elsewhere. Throughout Brazil, even today, entire communities speak German, Italian, Ukrainian, Russian, and Japanese. After the American Civil War, 20,000 Confederates settled in a place they named Americana in the state Sao Paulo. In the end, roughly half of them returned to the USA, but the ones which remained played a significant role in the development of that area, and still perform Dixie-related ceremonies each year in the town square. The Brazilians take pride in it. Compare that with the West. Compare that with the West, and it is quite contrast.